Hey y'all, so me and Jared are back again with another episode of Poli-Side-Eye. Uh, we came back a little bit later than sooner, but it's okay. We're worth the wait.
You know what they say. What do they say about waiting? Like, I don't know, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Isn't that the saying? Yeah.
Yes, it is. For this particular episode, I figured it would be timely to talk about the midterm elections, and it's tomorrow, and I'm hoping that you voted already or you're going to vote tomorrow. So I decided to ask Jared a couple questions about the midterm, and starting with, well, first and foremost, how have you been since our last episode?
I've been pretty good. Been quite writing quite a bit. So yeah, but all in all, I've been pretty good.
You've
Can't
been teaching or writing?
writing. I'm not teaching this year, so I'll start teaching next fall. So this year, I'm mainly just working on a ton of things that I've been needing to work on. So, and I've also been doing quite a bit of public facing work too. So if you read like The Nation or other publications, like you should see me there. So yeah, so I've been pretty busy.
He's so important. Midterm elections. So why should we care? Because the average person, normally it's like, okay, we're voting for president. Why should we care about the midterm elections?
Well, we should care about the midterm elections because many of these elections, you're voting for people who have a much more direct impact on your day-to-day life. So, like, usually these are your Congress persons. So, your representative in the House of Representatives, your senator in many states, you're voting for governor. So, these are people that obviously you're much closer to politically than you are the president. So if you have a divided government, so let's say Republicans take Congress, like that's going to have all kind of implications for Biden's agenda. So it's much harder for him to do things if he's having to deal with Republicans. So if you want Biden to have a chance to do more things, then you want him to have a Congress that's going to be amenable to his agenda, which means you want more Democrats. So there's definitely a lot in the line. I'm not one of those people that, so there's some people who like every election are like, this is the most election of our lifetimes. And I don't think that's particularly useful because you can't say that about every election. Like every election can't be the most important election of our lifetime. So I think doing that actually can dissuade some people from participating because they're just like, oh, I fucking heard this before. But I do think it's important to underscore like the importance of it without like, putting it on a pedestal.
Mm. What would you say to the people that live in blue states like me, like New York, California, Washington D.C., saying like, "Oh well, it's gonna be blue no matter what." What would you say to them?
Well, depending where you live in these places, that's not necessarily true. So there's actually some seats near New York that are pretty house seats that are pretty competitive. So if you remember, like for congressional races, it's not statewide. So you might live in a district that is really competitive. So in that case, like it might make a difference. Now, for like Senate, California or places like that, it's going to be hard for Republicans to win at the state level. But I would say if you live in one of these states where even if, Democrats or even on the opposite end, so if you live in, let's say, Louisiana, where Republicans generally control most things, like there are a number of like smaller or more local elections that could actually make a big difference. So I wouldn't just focus on what's going on at like the highest level, but also think about, oh, are there smaller elections, maybe for mayor, for city council, or things like that that might matter as well.
Hmm. Speaking of which, you know what really grinds my gears? Like, say, like we're in the South and it's like a majority Black population or majority liberal, like the cities, but the entire state is governed Republican. You know what I mean? Why is it always like that? If, let's say for Georgia, Atlanta. Atlanta's like, I'm pretty sure the most populated city in Georgia. Like, how come it's just so hard to turn Georgia blue and keep it blue?
That's kind of a hard question. So for state politics, I'm sure you've heard of the term gerrymandering. So
Yeah.
every time there's a census, which is every 10 years, so 2010, 2020, it'll be again in 2030, whoever controls the state legislature, whichever party that is, controls the state legislature, decides how the district lines, the congressional district lines are going to be drawn within that state. So if you live in a state where, let's say, Republicans, so let's use Georgia, for example. So Georgia has historically, or at least since the mid 20th century, has been pretty decidedly Republican, which means that for each of these census years, Republicans in Georgia have controlled the redistricting process that takes place every 10 years. So even if you end up with a case, which has been true for Georgia, where it's becoming bluer and bluer, if Democrats don't control the state legislature at the time that the district is drawn, it doesn't really matter what's going on in between those years. So Democrats weren't as competitive, let's say, in even though they did much better than people expected in 2020, they didn't do well enough to control the way that the district lines were going to be drawn. So of course, Republicans drew the lines more favorably for their electoral prospects. Now, in a lot of states, they have been taken to court for doing that, implying that they, not just Republicans, because Democrats do this too, although to a somewhat lesser extent, like in New York or California, for drawing district lines that are more favorable to their electoral prospects. And so I would say it's really a timing thing. Like, your hope is that your party controls the legislature in the years that we have a census, so that way they'll be able to draw the lines more amenable to whatever party is in power. So I think that's probably does most of the explaining. But then there's also, like, in a lot of places, let's say, let's stick with the Georgia example. Districts have to be drawn in a way that what they call it, they're contiguous. So like, you can't have districts that are like kind of all over the place. Like, they have to be kind of connected. And so because of that, also we have what's called majority minority districts. So some years ago, decades ago, actually, there was a push to make sure that there was at least some like minority representation in Congress. And one of the ways that that was done by drawing districts that were predominantly Black and eventually predominantly Latino. But because those districts have to be connected in some kind of geographic way, and because Black people tend to live in most places in cities, you have clustering. So you squeeze a lot of the Democratic population in these kind of urban enclaves, and then the rest of the state just ends up being conservative. So part of it is geographic, a lot of it is political, most of it is political, but some of it is also like geographic. So it's kind of a double whammy.
Okay, so for this particular election, what's at stake?
Well, as we know, the Republican Party is they're pretty open about it at this point, about they don't really want anything resembling an electoral democracy, which makes sense. So if you think about the Republican Party, what is it? It's a party that is more or less controlled by business interests. And their basic political platform is essentially don't pass any taxes on corporations, let rich people pay next to nothing in taxes, and like tweak the way that taxation is done so that you can find like loopholes to get out of paying. So pretty much their whole idea, or the whole reason that the Republican Party exists, is to support and to promote business interests. Well, if you go to like the average American person and be like, hey, vote for us, like, because we're going to pass tax cuts for like corporations and rich people, most people would be like, I don't support that, because why would they? So if that's the case, you have to figure out a way to like make sure that most of those people can't express their opposition to that kind of program. And how do you do that? Oh, well, you just like make it harder for people to vote. You like do what people call curating the electorate. So you try to make an electorate that is more favorable to your chances of winning. So the Republican Party has more or less been doing that now for the last couple decades, and they've gotten really successful at it. And one consequence of that has been, because I just said, like, in most states, Republicans control the legislature. They have appointed judges that are favorable to this program. They have passed policies, low taxation policies for corporations and stuff. And so if they take power, which I would say is likely, I wouldn't say it's a guarantee, but I would say probable, we're probably going to get more of that, because, I mean, that's the program that they're committed to. And so if you don't want to see that happen, then, and that's not to say, I drag Democrats too. So like, I'm not partisan in that way. But of the two parties, the Democratic Party is without a doubt less aggressive in that regard. And so I hate to use a like lesser of two evils frame because I just think they can be really like discouraging, but it's kind of where we are. So
I'm guessing like particular things at stake, like as far as like the House and the Senate. Will they take the House? Like, do they have a good chance of taking it in the Senate or what?
So my reading of the polling data is that the Republican Party is poised to take the House because, like I said earlier, Republicans control most state legislatures. So you remember 2020 was the last census. So most states have had to redistrict all of their congressional seats over the last like year or so. And so of course they've drawn these districts in many places that are favorable to they being Republicans that are favorable to their electoral outcomes. And so they've drawn a lot of districts that are called safe seats. So they're not competitive. So like it doesn't matter. You could run a bag of Skittles, and as long as they have an R next to their name, like they win. So you have that, and then you also have the thing I was saying earlier, which is that the Democratic Party is increasingly clustering in cities. But when you cluster like that, you lose competitive districts because pretty much Democrats are increasingly living in cities, but then the rest of the states are pretty much red. But you still have to draw districts. So what do? Well, you just draw districts that are pretty Republican for the most part. So they have a geographic and a political advantage in the House, which is why they're projected to win. Now, the Senate is a little bit trickier because it's a statewide election. So the nuances of how the districts are drawn and all that shit goes out the window. Like it doesn't matter. It just matters which of the two candidates gets the most votes at the statewide level. So you have a number of competitive races that are kind of making it a toss-up. So you have like the Georgia race, obviously, with Herschel Walker and Warnock, that's pretty much in a statistical dead heat. I think Walker
Which is crazy to me, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, well, most people are partisan. Like most people don't care like who the candidate is. Like they just care about like who has the letter that they identify with next to their name. So like I said, they could have run, I mean, Pennsylvania is running Dr. Oz and it's in a statistical dead heat. So like in a lot of these states, it's really competitive. So a lot of it is going to depend on turnout. So which of the two sides can turn out more of their, let's say, faithful voters? Now, the big kind of question mark or let's say the joker in all of this is, what about people who don't typically participate in elections? So in America, we have about a third of the electorate or a third of the population that doesn't vote even in presidential elections. So I think for midterm elections, turnout is usually 55, 57%. So you still have almost half of the country that doesn't participate. So the question is, can you get people who generally don't participate in electoral politics to participate? And if you can, are these people going to be more inclined to what the Democrats have to say or what the Republican Party has to say? And I think there's no way to know that. It's hard to poll what they call unintended voters because so for a lot of polling data, there's a lot of projection. So you can based on like existing voter files and stuff, you can kind of predict like which types of people have historically voted, who they voted for, not necessarily the candidate, but which party they're registered with, I should say. And then as a result, like the likelihood that they're going to A, turn out, and then B, turn out for the party that they're registered for. But for people who don't typically participate, like you have no way to like project or predict like how they're going to perform. So that's always the big wild card in this thing, which I don't know, honestly. Maybe people might be more inclined to participate because there's all these things going on, inflation, the economy sucks, stuff like, yeah, I don't know.
Isn't the housing market about to crash?
I mean, it's definitely the downturn. So prices are dropping pretty significantly. Crash, I don't like to make predictions about this, but there are a lot of signs about the housing market that are, I'd say, troublesome for sure, especially in certain areas. So it's really uneven. So in some cities, it's gotten really bad really quickly. Other places, it hasn't been quite as drastic. The drop in prices hasn't been quite as drastic. So kind of depends where you are.
Okay. So you're talking about important races earlier. So only three like I've been seeing that's been getting a lot of attention is Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp. and then there's Warnock and Walker, and then Beto and who's in Texas?
Running against Abbott, who is the current governor. Yeah.
Yes. Any other important races or?
The Pennsylvania Senate race is really close too. So Dr. Oz, famous Dr. Oz, who Oprah is the one who gave a platform to, and now she's like endorsing the other person. I'm like, yeah, but you created this monster. But I'm not gonna drag Oprah today. But yeah, he's running against. It's a really interesting race in Pennsylvania because Dr. Oz is running against this guy named John Fetterman, who is the current lieutenant governor in Pennsylvania, but he had a really bad stroke this summer. And so he was pretty much out of the campaign trail for like 2 or 3 months rehabilitating. And they had their one and only debate, I want to say either last week or maybe the week before last. And during the debate, he was slurring some of his words and really forgetful. And so, of course, Republicans are like taking it and running with it and saying like, oh, he's not fit to serve. And before he was up like 7 or 8 points in the poll, and now it's pretty much a toss up. So, but that's a really close race too, because the Senate is already split 50-50 and Kamala Harris is the tie-breaking vote as vice president. So, you don't want to lose a Democratic seat and then shift the balance of power. So Democrats really need to retain both of those seats, ideally, if they want to hang on to power.
Do you want to make any predictions?
So sure, I actually think Democrats are going to get shellacked for a couple of reasons. One, because if you look at every single poll, literally everyone, and you ask people what is the issue that is of most concern to them, it's consistently the economy / inflation. And then the second thing is always crime. That's like the two, like it doesn't, and this is true across, it doesn't matter if you're white, Black, Latino, young, old, rich, it doesn't matter. Like those are always the issues that, irrespective of the cross section being polled, like that's what people care most about. What are the Democrats running on? Abortion, saving democracy, which I don't want to downplay that because these are, obviously the abortion issue is really important and it's something that we should reckon with. But I do have an issue with the whole like save democracy framing because I think it's way too abstract. Like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to save democracy? But not only that, but there's another poll that Gallup conducted maybe a few months ago. And on the question of save democracy, even though most Americans, irrespective of party, even though most Americans think that democracy is at risk, what it's at risk from or who it's at risk from is kind of an open question. Democrats say that Republicans and Donald Trump are the biggest risk to democracy. And Republicans say that Democrats and Joe Biden are the biggest threat to democracy. So like, how do you square that circle? So my thing has been, well, if you know that the thing that most people care about is inflation and the economy, why are you hanging your hat on this like abstract, nebulous, like save democracy thing that means different things to different people? With the economy, like people, that's very material. Like people know what they want. Like they want better wages. They want you to stop prices from right now. Whether or not Joe Biden and Democrats can do that is another question. But the fact that they're not even addressing it, the fact that they're not even trying to explain to people why it's happening, is a really troublesome thing. And to add one thing to that is the things that are where prices are rising the most. You probably don't know this because you're in New York, but I filled up yesterday. I got gas yesterday. It was $3.89 a gallon. That was for regular unleaded. I filled up 2 weeks ago, literally the same exact gas station, and it was $3.49. It's gone up 40 cents in the span of 2 weeks. And this is what people are realizing as they're going to the poll. So you don't think that people are going to take this out on whoever is currently in power, in this case, the Democrats? I do. I think they will. Do I think that it's rational? Probably not. But if you don't give people an explanation for why things are happening, then they're going to make up one. And so for them, it's going to be because Joe Biden is destroying the economy. So I think the Democrats are going to have a hard time. I think that a lot of these close seats, they're going to end up, I think Herschel Walker is going to win. I definitely don't think Stacey Abrams is going to win. And I think that until the Democratic Party decides that it wants to be the party that's going to like talk to like working class people, I think that that's going to continue to be the case. So you can't depend on the Republican Party. Like people are like, oh, the Republicans aren't doing it. Well, yeah, because they're not going to do that. That's not what the Republican Party is. It's a big business party. They don't pretend to be anything else.
Well,
Whereas the Democratic Party tries to pretend.
well, here's my thing though. Like, say I am frustrated of the prices going up. Me switching my vote to Republican, like, what the fuck they gonna do? They're not gonna do anything better.
Well, I think the issue is that for many people who probably thinking that way, they probably don't think that either of the parties are going to do anything. So they're probably they don't even view whatever either party is saying in the issue as legitimate. They're just going to vote for the person that just probably makes them feel good, or the person that says something that sounds good. Like even if it's not plausible, which is kind of where we are in American politics. People are just really cynical and very nihilistic when it comes to politics. And I think part of the reason that is because there's so many things going on, and neither of the parties is taking the time, in my opinion, to really sit down and explain like why inflation is happening, to sit down and explain why is it that the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates, which has all kind of consequences. So if you have a credit card balance, like you're paying more for that now because of that. Nobody's trying to make sense of that for people. And so, the Republican parties come in and they say, oh, well, like, yeah, we won't do anything about the economy, but we'll make sure that, the woke liberals can't like tell you what you can and can't say. And for a lot of people, that's appealing. Like, do I think it's rational? No, but I can understand how people get there.
So much for hope. I mean, I am not talking to Barack Obama.
Good.
Like,
don't come for me, people.
No, it's fine. I mean, we need the harsh truths. And you heard it here first, y'all. Like, Jared is predicting a Republican sweep, so gird your loins.
I want to be wrong. Like, I will come back and I will eat crow if I'm wrong about this.
I hope he is wrong. I hope he is wrong.
I hope I'm wrong too, honestly.
Like, if Pennsylvania lose, Stacey Abrams lose, Warnock loses, and Beto, like all four, like that is a gut punch.
Well, I mean, the Democrats made their bed, so.
Well, we got to end it there, y'all. That's our thoughts on the midterms. Please make sure you vote.
I didn't mean to end on such a sour note. Let me put it this way. It's still in the statistical dead heat. So if you weren't planning on voting, vote now. You might you might make me wrong. So okay. There you go.
So before we end, I want to introduce a new segment to Poli-Side-Eye where, I know Jared hates billionaires. So I want to dedicate a little 1 to 2 minute segment of dragging a billionaire. And why not start with Elon Musk, who is like had a hostile takeover of Twitter, and I feel like thousands of people have lost their jobs today. I feel like the equivalent of him taking over Twitter is kind of like Donald Trump winning the presidency. Like, I feel like this shit is going to hit the fan soon. I'm not sure if people are going to stay on Twitter, but yeah, what do you think about this whole thing?
I mean, Elon Musk he is what he is. Like, he's super arrogant, narcissistic, doesn't care about anything but his own power. And yeah, I mean, as somebody who grudgingly enjoys Twitter, I do feel like he is going to make it less enjoyable.
I'm gonna add some insults on that. He also is just a terribly ugly white man. He's aging like a banana. His face literally looks like it is melting. Or it looks like someone like just took his face off like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and put it on a pig. That's what he looks
drag.
I have to,
this is like a Poplos level drag. Proper drag.
Hey, but yeah, continue.
Yeah, so I'm just curious kind of really what his intentions are. My hunch is that he's just going to try to make it profitable fairly quickly. So Twitter is generally not been profitable. Like, it's not actually social media right now, or tech firms generally are not doing very well right now for a host of reasons. One, because tech firms depend so much on advertisements. Like, that's kind of what they've leaned into, which is, if you notice, if you go on like Instagram, part of the reason you have so many reels now is because advertisers love Reels because they can squeeze more into it, and Meta and all these other platforms can obviously charge more for longer advertisements and so on. So with Twitter, like I think he's trying to make it like profitable. And part of the way that I guess he thinks that can be done is by, I guess, making it less like political and less like contentious. Now, I don't know how he plans to do that, but yeah, so I'm curious to see where he goes with it. My hunch is though he is just going to try to make it profitable and then just sell it and then try to just make out like a bandit like really quickly. So part of the reason he's doing these layoffs is because obviously the most your biggest expense for any company is your labor costs. So I don't want to get too technical in the economic weeds, but generally what a lot of folks do is what they call like a leveraged buyout. So they'll take on all of this debt and then essentially cut the labor force and then use that borrowed money to like reinvest in changes and hopefully things that will make it more profitable. But what we know is that generally it doesn't do anything for anybody but like the major stakeholders. So if you work at Twitter, or like most of us, like we're probably gonna like find it less enjoyable, but they don't care about that. Like all he cares about is making a profit. So
Yeah.
but yeah, I did read earlier that Twitter was sued because Twitter is headquartered in California, in San Francisco, I think.
Yeah.
And in California, I think anytime there's let's say a massive layoffs at a firm or a company, you have to give, I believe it's a 60-day notice.
Yeah, I thought it was a class action.
Right. So that's ongoing. I don't know if anything will come out of that. There might be some movement kind of at the local courts, but I think if it gets higher up, I feel like some of these conservative courts would probably side in favor of Twitter, which is kind of the whole point of like Republican judicial takeover, is that you want to stack the courts with people who are favorable to conservative ideas, favorable to business, favorable to corporations. And so I think it might get a hearing maybe at a lower level, but like once it gets up to some conservative court, they're gonna be like, fuck y'all, they can do what they want. So yeah, I don't know. But yeah, he's a pretty I mean, they're all awful, but I think the thing that makes Musk especially awful is because at least some of the other CEOs try to act like they're not that terrible. Like I don't like Bill Gates either, but at least he tries to be like, oh, I care about the world. Elon Musk is like, fuck y'all, I'm just trying to get rich and y'all will deal. And so I think that's what makes him like a good target because he has such a punchable face, as you said, and he's just an asshole.
Thank you. And the bastard has done that before with Tesla, I believe. He fired 10% of the company.
Yeah, I mean, but one thing I would caution against doing is that I think some of the discourse is focused too much on trying to make this about Elon Musk. And I'm like, it's not just about Elon Musk. Like these corporations are savage and this type of shit happens all the time. It's just that we have somebody like Elon Musk who is just like unapologetic about it. But most of the times, like they'll do the same thing and be like, oh, we just have to make good business decisions for the person and then still fire you. So like, it doesn't really matter if somebody fires you with a smile or fires you by like stabbing you, like you're still getting fired. So it might hurt a little bit more, but like the outcome is still the same. And so that's kind of how I think about it.
Well, hopefully he'll go into space again and, maybe it'll malfunction or just plummet into the sun. You never know. So that was our segment for Drag a Billionaire. Please, in the comments, if you have a billionaire you want us to drag, we will do it in the next episode. Thank you, Jared, for this lovely discourse, and let them know where they can find you.
Yes, so I can be found on Twitter or the Instagram at JAYC Tiger Fan, JC Tiger Fan.
Well, yeah, y'all. You can follow me, of course, CDIGGI1 on Instagram and Twitter. And yeah, like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see y'all for the next episode. Bye.